Good afternoon. Can you hear me all right? I wear hearing aids and my wife tells me that I talk too softly. I can hear myself very well, but she needs to turn her hearing aid up. Anyway. I want to talk to you about three people, an elder in my home church, and then jump into the Old Testament to Queen Esther, and then I want to come back and talk about one of my small group students. 64 years ago, I was baptized into Christ at the ripe old age of 16. Small country church, very loving, very kind. A couple of Sundays after my confession of faith and my baptism, William Boyd, a carpenter, soft-spoken, very, very deep spiritual Christian, took me aside. I can still remember the pew that I sat in, and he came and sat down beside me, gave me a little blue book to read. I don't remember the book, but I remember what he said. He said, "Gary, you have accepted Christ and you're just beginning. It's like stepping through the gate of a garden." And he said, you don't want to stand at the gate. You want to go into the garden and enjoy its fruits. He said, too many people are baptized into Christ. They step through the gate of the garden and they stand there and they lose out on all that God has promised for them. I never will forget that analogy, because in a garden, we want to grow things. And in the kingdom garden, it's not plants that we grow, but it's people that we grow, and we want to grow them in a relationship with Christ to get closer to God and enjoy Him. God is certainly to be feared at times, but mostly He wants us to enjoy Him. So I want to take us briefly to Queen Esther in the Old Testament. She was in the kingdom garden, and you know that when you're in a garden, there's going to be days of sunshine, there's going to be days of good growth, there's going to be weeds to be contended with, there's going to be storms and difficulty, and there's going to be insects and attacks. Queen Esther now is in one of those storms. She was a Jewish queen of King Ahasuerus, who was the king of the great Persian Empire, a huge empire. And one of the henchmen of King Ahasuerus, Haman, hated the Jews. He hated particularly the relative that had raised Esther. And so he got Ahasuerus, he conned him into signing a decree that all of the Jewish people were to be annihilated. When Mordecai, who is Queen Esther's adopted father, so to speak, he was mortified. And since Esther was the queen, he thought she can do something about this. So he called her in. And she said to him, Mordecai, you know, if I go before the king without being summoned, if he doesn't hand out the golden scepter to me, I would be killed. And he said to Esther, if you don't do this, God will raise up somebody else, and if you don't go, you won't escape either. She said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to call all the Jews in Susa and fast for 3 days and 3 nights. I want you to think about that. This was her participation in the kingdom garden. She was going to fast, her maids were going to fast, and that was going to give God the opportunity to move into her life and help her succeed. After the 3 days fasting, she went to the king. He extended the golden scepter. She came to him, and through banquets and through pleading with the king, the plot against the Jews was canceled. Haman was hanged on his own gallows, and God was able to do something magnificent in the life of Queen Esther because she went into the garden, she risked, She fasted, and God blessed her. Lastly, I want to tell you about a student in my small group classes. It was an interesting group, and it was really kind of fun to work with these students. And so about halfway through the life of the group, I said, I want you to fast this next week for a whole day. And you can imagine how these students looked at me. Well, fast? I've never fasted. One student said, can I fast from TV? And I thought to myself, yes, if he's going to make a sacrifice, he can sacrifice that. So the group finally consented to do this. And next week we got together and I said, okay, last week I asked you to fast. And I said, what happened? And here's Charles. He's an Atlas kind, big, broad-shouldered, tall kind of guy, some guy you don't want to get into a fight with. And he spoke right up and he said, well, my wife and I are newly married. He said, we're having financial troubles. And he said, I've never fasted. So that day I fasted, and all day I thought about my financial troubles, and I prayed. And he worked part-time as a waiter in a restaurant. Went to work that night, and he served this lady. She sat by herself. And as she finished her meal, he was cleaning off the table. She opens her purse. She takes out a huge tip, a huge one. And she says to Chuck, God told me to give you this. And your silence is just like my students. I sat there and I thought, I can't beat that story at all. So if we're going to grow spiritually, get into the garden, get involved, give God the opportunity to bless you, and He's waiting to do it. Thank you very much.